In this video, I'm going to go over the construction and test flight of my 250 size racing quad. So let's start off with the components I've selected. Okay, so let's get started, shall we? So, the first thing we need to do is take these motors and hook them up to the 4 Afro ESCs, then attach them to the carbon fiber motor arms. Now, something I like about these ESCs and motor combo is they both come with these nice little handy bullet connectors. So I can simply just plug those straight in. Also means if I get any of the rotations reversed, it's easy to change. Most people like to cut those off and just solder the wire straight onto the ESC. It eliminates an extra failure point, but I never have any problems with these, so I like to use them because they're convenient. Now the only issue with that is those wires are slightly longer than the arm. So to avoid having a big yucky mess here, I'm going to cut those wires shorter and resolder the bullet connectors. Okay, so what I've done here is I've temporarily attached the motor arm to the frame, the base plate of the frame, so that I can get a better idea of how this is going to look when it's all together. And I've come to the conclusion that I am not going to be able to use these bullets. They're just too big and there's not enough room in here. So instead what I'll do is desolder the wires off the, well, first of all remove the heat shrink, desolder the wires off the ESC, then solder these wires directly onto those pads. And that'll work out well. It will also make it easier to get the directions of the motors right, because if I take all these motors and I solder the red one on there, the black on there, the blue on there, that motor will always spin the same direction for all 4 motors. So to get the directions right, all I have to do is solder 2 on this way and solder 2 on reverse polarity. That will guarantee that I have 2 motors spinning clockwise and 2 motors spinning counterclockwise. Okay, so time to do that. Okay, so now that I've got those done, I have loosely attached the 4 motor arms to the base plate, just with 2 screws each left loose, and that's just going to make wiring things up a little bit easier. Once I've got all the wiring sorted, then I'm actually going to go and properly assemble the frame. So, now it's time for the power distribution board. Normally, I would prefer to use a proper distribution board, but unfortunately the one I've ordered hasn't arrived in the mail yet. So, for now, I have just made up this little board, just out of a piece of printed circuit board, and I have soldered on the little bullet connector female plugs that came with the servos. I mean not the servos, the ESCs. So I can simply plug the ESCs straight into these piece of cake. So now, okay, very important thing. Now I need to work out the front and the back of the quadcopter. I'm gonna call that the front. Okay, easy. Now, because it doesn't matter, I will put this on here so that the plug for the battery is towards the back, and I will secure that with a cable tie. Okay, but now, before we get too carried away and plug all this in, there's something we need to do that I forgot. We need to check what direction these motors spin. And for that, I will be right back. Okay, now, to check the direction the motors spin is rather easy. So what I have here is a power distribution board, this, a battery, a receiver, and my Turnigy 9X transmitter. And to test the motors, all I simply do is plug the ESC into power, plug the signal line into channel 3, which is throttle, and plug in power. And the motor initializes, and it spins. Now, what direction does this spin? Let's see. That motor is spinning clockwise. So, to mark that, I'm just going to put a little C on here. And now for the next one. Okay, unplug that, and we're done with that. Transmitter away over there. Okay, now, next, I'm going to just put those aside for a moment because I think it'll be easier to next install the flight controller. Okay, so normally the flight controller would go on that way because it has a little arrow which points forward. But the flight controller has this little USB port here which you use to program it. And there's going to be junk here. Well, there's going to be battery on top, but down here there is going to be my FPV transmitter, which will get in the way and make it a pain to plug in the USB cord. So, to fix that, I'm going to do that. Now, that does have issues because now the quadcopter is going to think that that way is forward, right? But that I can fix in the programming on the board, so it's fine. There's actually an option to adjust that to tell it that that way is forward. But before we can install this, we have some soldering to do, because these come without the servo pins soldered. That one needs to solder on there, and this one needs to solder on there. Okay. That shouldn't be too hard. spacer to put under that. Okay. Now I'm going to spread up so it's not boring to watch. Okay, now that is done. Maybe a bit hard to see, but they're nicely soldered. Okay, time to install it. Alright, so default the board goes that way, but we're going to put it this way. It's going to have the lines for the servos pointing outside a little bit, but that's okay. Let's shorten this cable tie a little bit more. Now, how are we going to screw that on there? Because obviously there's the distribution board under there, so that's can't just screw it straight down to the carbon fiber. So I have these little spaces. And some screws. These aren't ideal, given that these screws are slightly too big and so it's spaces, but I'll do the trick. Now, that's going to touch the negative there. Almost. Not quite. But even if it did, that's negative, so it wouldn't hurt. And I'm pretty sure carbon... Oh, wait a second, actually. Oh, yes. There's going to be an issue there. See that? Yep. I'm going to have to make an adjustment, unless I can... Okay. Be right back. Okay, so as you can see, I've just moved these over a little bit so that we can now fit the spacers next to them. Perfect. Now to mount the controller. Okay, so I think it's finally time to permanently attach, well not necessarily permanently, but attach the motor arms. So, the directions. We have clockwise here, and clockwise here, and counterclockwise here, counterclockwise here. So, let's start bolting. Okay. Now, the way this works is the motors here go in these holes here, and they are sandwiched between the two plates, like so. And when you've got the 4 screws in there, that makes it really strong. Okay, so I'm going to go and do that now in high speed, just so that it doesn't take forever. Okay, so now we've got all those screws tightened up. Looks good. Really solid. Kind of annoyed though because they left out, I was 3 screws short with these long screws. Had plenty of these short screws left over, the ones that hold the top frame on. But the pack didn't come with enough of these screws. So I'm pretty sure I didn't lose any anywhere. But oh well, I had a few spares floating around that I could use. So not a big deal. Now, time to plug in the power wires. So that's pretty simple. These just plug in nice and easily. Okay. Now then, next I need to connect the motors. And for that I'm going to have to reference the instructions. So, be right back. Alright then, so I've referred to the instructions and worked out that this is motor 1, this is motor 2, this is motor 3, this is motor 4. So, looking at the pins on this, no way you'll be able to see it on the video, but what we have is pins, outputs 1 through to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, there's actually 7 there. Interesting. But, okay, so motor 1 goes in here. Signal is on the top. Next we will plug in the servo adapter. So this goes on to this connector. Now I'm probably going to have to reference the manual again, but let's just say, yep, 1 second. Okay, so this plugs on here like this. Okay, and these wires here go off to the receiver. So next we need to work out where I am going to put this receiver. Yeah, because this thing, I have a camera that needs to go up here, like right about there, and I have a transmitter that is going to go up in the back here. Actually going to be up off the bottom plate and strapped to the top plate. So then, where should I put this receiver? I guess I could probably go on the top plate, around about here. How would that work out? That would work out to be around about... Okay, so it's going to be one of those rubber bits. Kinda. Yeah, how long are these wires? But there's still room above that. Well, maybe not. it's time to add the receiver, which will now comfortably sit right there. Got a cable tie to hold that down. And now theoretically, if I plug a battery into this, the controller should power up. Let's see if that happens. Everything looks fine. And there we go. It's up and running. Okay, so now to work out the receiver configuration, and also to make sure I've got the motors plugged into the right ports, I'm now going to take this over to my computer. Okay, so now it's time to finally plug the board into our computer and program it. So the first thing we need to do before we can actually plug it in is install this driver. This is a virtual COM port that allows the board to actually communicate with your computer, because without it the computer doesn't know what the hell the board is and it just will not work. So I've already installed this, so I'm going to skip this step. But next you need to launch the CleanFly configurator, which is an app you can get in the Google App Store. It's a free app that's designed to work with this board and other boards like it. Now, I've already done this, but I'm going to do it again to show you how it's done. But before the CleanFly configurator can work with this board, you need to install the CleanFly software on the board itself. Before I do that, I'm going to have to plug in the board. Take my word for it that I'm doing this right now. The board is now plugged in, and if I was to press connect it would work because I've already set this up. But to show you how it's done, I'm going to go to firmware flasher. One moment. Okay, so it helps if your USB is properly connected to your computer. So now I'm going to select COM4, which is the port NAS32 board on my system. I will go to firmware flasher, and we need to select the right firmware for this board. This is a NAS board, so we want to use the latest NAS software. We'll leave this all as default, and we'll use load firmware online. What this will do is it will load this driver from the internet, assuming you have an internet connection, or if you've downloaded the software you can just load it from a local file. Okay, now here is the information on the driver. Has a change log, some important information. We don't need to know about that right now. We just need to flash it to the board. Now the lights on the board are flashing. It's very important that you do not unplug the board during this process or you will have issues. Programming successful. Okay, so now the software is installed on the board, we can press the connect button. And now here we have the CleanFly configurator with all our little tabs here for the different settings. And on the main screen we have a virtual representation of the quadcopter itself. And if I pick up the quadcopter and move it around, you'll see this shows how the board programming thinks the board is moving. Now, I'm rocking the quadcopter forward and back at the moment, but as you see, the board thinks it's going side to side. That is because I mounted the board with a 90-degree offset to the right. So to fix that, that's the first thing we want to fix, is we go to configuration, and down here on the board alignment we want to change the yaw to 90 degrees. Then we will save and reboot. Give that a second to reboot. Okay, now if we go back to the setup page, we'll see, now tipping it forward and back, it works properly. Okay, so what's next? There's not a lot that should need to be adjusted. The default settings and everything else should be about right. But next we need to set up our remote control, because I still haven't plugged in the leads for the controls. And I could look at the instructions to figure that out, but I think it's easier just to go to the receiver page. Now, let's take a look here. I'm going to turn on my receiver, and I'm going to plug in
What are these lines? Let's see. I'll plug in number 1 first, because that's the one that supplies power to the receiver. We need to plug that in first. I'm not sure what that goes to, so let's try the throttle. Well, no, better yet, let's try channel 1, because it's number 1 on the NAS board. Okay, so I now have channel 1 from the NAS board plugged into channel 1 on the receiver. But because the receiver lines are powered by the by the speed controllers, we're going to need to attach main power for this, because USB is just not going to cut it. Now we'll see, we have roll showing up. So, is that right? That is right. Aileron is roll, and that is channel 1. So, let's now try channel 2. Okay, channel 2 is pitch, and that is going to be correct. Okay, it looks a little bit weird, I might have to adjust that, but that is going to the correct channel on the transmitter. Now, we plug channel 3 into channel 3. I'm seeing a pattern here. These seem to be very obvious, as you would expect. But some receivers do this differently and could be a little confusing. This is the easiest way to work it out, and that is throttle. That seems to look fine. Well, not really, but that's the correct channel at least. Then channel 4 should be yaw, theoretically. Now, the question is channel 4 on the left or the right of the plug? Okay, and there's the yaw. And I may as well just plug in the auxiliaries so that they're not floating around, getting in the way. We will need them as well. There is only room for 2 of these, so I'm going to have to figure out what to do with the other 2 spare wires. Keep them out of the way. But there we go. We have everything plugged in. And that auxiliary there should be working. It is. The other auxiliary, that works as well, kind of. But okay. Now, I'm just going to set up a new model on my remote control for this quadcopter, and I will be back. Okay, so now what I've done is I have created a new profile on my Turnigy 9X transmitter, and I have calibrated the central stick positions so they all line up at as close to 1500 as possible. So you can now see that all of my stick inputs are working, and they all stop, except for the throttle, at around about 1500, or as close to it as I can get. I have also set up a 3-position switch on auxiliary 1, which I'll use for the flight modes, and I've set up my gear switch on auxiliary 2. I'm not sure what I'll use that for yet, but I'll find a use for it. Okay, now, the next thing to do, well, before I do anything else, if I push my throttle stick right down and to the right now, the system should arm. Okay, so theoretically it should be armed now, if I give it some throttle. Okay, so we're not arming. That's an issue. Try that again. Alright, there we go. Our motors are now armed. And we should shut that down by pushing the throttle, the roll all the way to the left with the throttle at 0, and now they are disarmed. Okay, so now the next thing to do is make sure all the motors are working properly. Now, I'll just point out, as this warning here says, you must remove all propellers before you do anything like this. I've already done this, or I would have already had issues when I tested out the arming. But for safety reasons, you have to remove the propellers, and the motors are going to be spinning during these tests, so no propellers is definitely required. Just going to check that box which says I understand that the propellers have to be removed, blah blah blah. Now, if I use these sliders here, I can control the motors. So if I use this master slider, all motors start up. Now, I'm just going to go and make sure that each of these motors are controlling, or each of these sliders are controlling the correct motor on the quad. So remember, the quad motors go 1, 2, 3, 4, those are the channels, and let's just make sure that they actually are set up in that order. 1 is correct, 2 is correct, 3 is correct, and of course 4 is correct. And they're all spinning in the correct direction as well, which is good. So theoretically, this quad should be ready to fly. But at the moment, there's nowhere to strap the battery on because I haven't put the top plate back on yet. There's also a little bit of more work that I want to do before I take it for its first test flight, such as setting up the FPV gear. Okay, time to go back to the bench and do all that. But before we do that, I almost forgot I need to set up the modes first. So the modes I care about are angle and horizon. To add those, I just click add range, and by default this is position 1 or position 2 on a 3-position switch. Position 1 is outside of this set range, so it won't be active. If I set the switch to position 2, this mode will be active because this little dot here which shows the position of the switch is within this set range. Now we'll add horizon, and of course that's the same, but we don't want that to be active in this range, so we will adjust these sliders up like so. And now when I set the switch to position 3, horizon will be active and angle will not be active. So if I just press save, you'll see now that this horizon mode has become green because this is now active. Now that I've saved these things to the board, if I switch to position 2, angle is active, and if I switch to position 1, neither of these are active, which means it's in acrobatic mode. Okay, so now I can go back to the bench.
Now it's finally time to install the FPV gear and finish putting this quad together. Okay, so the main FPV camera, this is the one I'll primarily be using to view the footage as I'm flying. This is going to go right about there. Then on top of that we have the top plate of the frame. Now I have removed this camera mount, but that goes there. And I'm going to put this camera, which is what I'm going to be using to record, right there. The video transmitter is going to be cable tied to this top plate right underneath here like this. And that's about it. Just need to start putting that all together now. Now, I'm not going to attach this camera to the bottom plate because I need to put screws through these holes here. But in order to screw through those, I would have to remove the bottom plate. 2 plates there, remember? So, the easiest way to do that is just going to be to attach this to the top plate. And that will be attached using this little piece here. This is just a holder which allows the camera to swivel up and down, which is kind of useful because if you're moving really fast and the quad is tipped forward, well then you're just going to be looking at the ground. So it's nice to be able to tilt that camera up a little bit so when you're moving at high speed you can still see where you're going. Alright, I will now install all this shit and get back to you. Okay, so that is everything mounted on the board. Last thing to do is just hook up the cable from the transmitter to the camera. And that's pretty simple. I just take this cable, this end goes in there, and then this end goes straight into the camera. In theory. Okay, there we have it. I'll just tie these wires down, keep them out of the way. And now, if I want to record video using this camera, I simply have to unplug this out of here and plug it into there. And that will activate this camera instead of this one, so I can record video. Alright, and next thing, before I actually install this, I think it would be a good idea to thread through this battery strap because it would be easier to do it now than when I have this all put back on the quad. Okay, now I can put this back on the quadcopter. Okay, and that's on. Now, when I want to actually use the FPV system, it's going to need power, obviously. So I simply take this little cord that I left here, and I plug that into the transmitter in here. It's going to be a little bit fiddly to plug in. I might have to do something about that in the future, but there's a little plug in there I need to plug that into, and that will power up the FPV system. A couple of little things to point out. I have mounted the receiver antenna onto one of the standoffs, just using a couple of little rubber pieces that I turned into a little spacer. I have added a rubber band around the XT60 connector on the back. That is just to make sure that this wire doesn't get caught up in the prop at the back. That would be problematic. And now, speaking of, it's time to finally add the props. Okay, now assuming I haven't forgotten anything, this should be ready for its first test flight. I'm going to do something about the battery strap though, because it seems this strap just isn't going to work. It's like it's designed for much larger batteries because that's meant to go through there, fold over, and velcro to itself like that. But in this case, you have a situation where it's like this, much smaller, and the velcro can't, see, this would be wrapping around the body. You can't actually velcro it to the underside. So yeah, I'm going to need to work out a smaller strap or something for that. Okay, so it's been a couple of days now. I've taken this out for a few flights, but had a little bit of trouble with it. Main issue is the automatic PID calibration does not want to work on this, and that has resulted in just a few nasty crashes. One of them made me grateful that I bought extra prop arms, because as you can see, these are pretty much the only part of this quad that will break from what I've read, and it broke. But I had spares, so that's okay. In the meantime, my Mobius camera arrived, so now when I do the video recording, I will actually be able to take much better resolution videos, and that'll be nice. But in the meantime, I have a few other parts that arrived, specifically the power distribution board, which I'm going to install now, and some LEDs to go with that. And I lost the little rubber mounts that go into this, so I got some extra ones. These are just some spares lying around which aren't ideal, so I'm going to replace them. And in one of my crashes, I damaged this motor and this ESC, so I'm going to replace those as well. And I'm going to do all that off camera because you've seen me work on this enough now. You don't need to see it anymore. Okay, so now that I've finally got everything soldered up, I can show you what makes this new power distribution board so nice. And well, it's pretty obvious. It is so much cleaner than this. I mean, there's no wires running across the board anywhere. And I've also, all these speed controllers, they're also all wired up to this, because each little motor has its own little signal connector on the board, and they all run back up to here, and I can just run a little wire from there straight into the controller, and no more messy wires running across the board. Okay, so I just need to finish putting it back together and take it for a test flight. Okay, so here it is, fully assembled and ready to fly. I figured I should just give you a quick look over it before I actually go into the flight video. So we have a Mobius here, FPV camera here, there is the transmitter there, and there's a few other bits and pieces in here. We have an OSD, micro OSD board floating around in there, which just shows the battery voltage on the screen. I modified it so it shows the main battery voltage as well as the individual cell voltage, because that's just something I like to see. And we have an XT60 just soldered straight to the back. Plug that straight in there. And there are all sorts of lights. and beeping because there's no transmitter connected. But there we go, it's ready to go. Also put some cable ties around these rubber standoffs this time, so this should not be able to come off. But that's about it.
And here's a short test flight. I apologize for the poor camera work. I recorded this with my camera strapped to my transmitter, and it's not too easy to fly a quadcopter while pointing a camera at it. And here is some FPV flight footage from flying around at a local park.